And of course, we all know that no one quite knows what this post-lockdown world is going to look like either. And that is something which we are very much looking forward to exploring as part of these webinars. So I'm really, really excited that JGA Group are decided to run this series of webinars, which is obviously about how COVID-19 is going to disrupt marketing and sales. And as you'll have seen from the other upcoming webinars, we will be exploring that across a range of topics over the next few weeks. And I hope you're as excited to get stuck into this as I am. So just to say a couple of things about webinar protocol, first of all, we do suggest, if you can, bandwidth and connectivity issues permitting, that you have your videos on. Obviously, that is a personal preference, but if you are able to have them on, I think that can work quite nicely in helping everyone get to know each other a bit. Couple of things which I always suggest for webinars. If you would like to speak, you can obviously do a hand signal, so you can physically put your hand up, or you can just put your hand up electronically on Zoom. So either of those things are great. If someone has made a point which you really agree with, it can be quite nice and quite supportive for the speakers if you raise both hands to show that you agree with what's been said. So that's quite a nice way to show support for some of the speakers, also delegates today, who I'm sure will have lots of exciting things to share. So we've talked about the webinar series, we've talked about the webinar protocol, and of course you have seen the events guide as well, which obviously the webinar protocol very much builds on. Before we hear from our fantastic speakers that we've got lined up today, you may have seen that when Jubril kindly sent out the joining instructions for the webinar, there was a question to get you all thinking, or as he termed it, food for thought. And clearly the theme of the webinar today is very much about how COVID-19 is going to change product, and lots of different discussions around that topic, which I think is going to lead to some really interesting conversations later. So our question for you to get you all thinking is just to name one area where COVID-19 has changed your organisation's products or services. And that can be a small change or it can be a big change. And obviously one that has happened a lot for many organisations over the last couple of months is about delivering physical services online. So it'd be great to hear an example from any of the delegates who kindly joined us today about where just one area or even more where the pandemic has changed how you offer products and services. So who would like to kick off and give us a sense of where they're at with that question? Anil, thank you so much for being our first contributor. Anil, can you introduce yourself and tell us your response to that question as well, if that's okay?
Good afternoon. I work for Western Foods, who's a leading manufacturer of ethnic goods focusing on Chinese and Indian, selling to restaurants, takeaways, wholesalers, multiples, etc. So some of the brands you might be familiar with are Patex or Raja or Elephant Flower. So yeah, one of the ways that we have been impacted the most is probably through manufacturing. Obviously, taking into consideration all the health and safety procedures, there have been a lot of our manufacturing guys that have been off, and now we see the implications of having something like that in manufacturing affecting the whole chain, going down to sales to a point where we're trying to get products in during a time where stores are open for a certain amount of hours. But because we're having challenges actually getting on shelf because we haven't got the product, our competitors are having a bit of a field day. So we're lucky enough to be in a position with most of our brands where we're market leaders. We've now seen brands that we didn't know existed before have now come up, like a man in a van business, going to smaller retailers. We have now seen customers where they've got to a point, it's not brand loyalty as such. Some of our retailers, they just want to service their consumers and their customers with pretty much anything because of the lack of availability. So we've found quite a big push. I mean, now we've started to get product in bit by bit. It's a lot more promising because the orders are coming and going straight out to delivery, but it's just the nervousness and looking 6 to 12 months ahead. Where does this really leave us? What's the real impact of this? Are we going to see those smaller brands maintain their shelf space, are we going to see people feel as if they're a little bit not going for the premium products, but maybe a good offering rather than a better offering, which we provide. So, thinking of work, and they may have some, financial changes within the household. So we start losing some presence there. So that's mainly looking at next 6 to 12 months. What are we really going to be doing to making sure we're still the market leaders?
Thank you, Anil. That's such an interesting example, and there's so much there about the impact on supply chains, about relationships in the supply chain as well, and also about how customer behaviour is changing as a result. So thank you so much for sharing that example. There's a lot there, and I'm sure that there are many of those themes that will come up as we go through the discussion today. Fantastic. Thank you, Anil. Great example to kick off on. Before we move over to the panel discussion, would anyone else like to share an example of how COVID-19 has changed the products or services that their organisation's offering? Steve, thank you. Hello, Steve.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the training and things that we're providing, I think we had to, I mean, we were already doing a lot of distance learning, but I think even then we'd not necessarily underestimated, but we've had to be a lot more flexible than perhaps we thought we would need to be, in that not only do different learners have different learning needs, but we've got to be flexible about how COVID-19 has changed their working environment, because everyone's now working at home, and home environments aren't predictable in terms of reliability of things like internet connections. They're also not predictable in terms of level of interruption. People are working at home with other people and with children. People have got other demands on their time and things. So I think COVID-19 has helped us kind of see people not just as individual learners, but individual people in kind of working their home environment as well. So I think the key thing that we've had to change is just how flexible we are to support individual learners and individual employers. Yeah,
That's fascinating, Steve. Thank you, because as you say, everyone's working in an environment, indeed organisations as well, where there are so many different variables and where people are juggling so much at the moment. And I love your point about how organisations, products and services kind of need to flex around that and really adapt to this new, very fast-moving environment. Thank you. So some great contributions there from Steve and Anil. Thank you so much for kicking us off. I'm delighted that we're going to be exploring a lot of those themes more now as we move into the panel discussion. So we have two fantastic speakers with us today, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce them. First of all, we have Robin Marks. Robin has a BA in Media Studies and started his career in London West advertising agencies. He now has over 25 years experience creating, organising and managing a wide range of commercial corporate events. And you can imagine how much disruption there has been in that sector at the moment. So I'm delighted to be hearing more from Robin later. In the past 10 years, many of Robin's corporate event projects have been working with a third sector involving corporate sponsorship for charity corporate events and initiatives. And since January 2019, he's been working with JGA as a tutor and skills coach on 2 apprenticeship courses, event assistant and PR and communications. Welcome, Robin. And also delighted to be joined by Richard Goodwin. Richard's career has spanned 20 years in marketing, sales and strategy roles in British Steel and the stationery office. Since 2015, Richard has been managing director of independent training provider, the JGA Group, leading it to the West London Business Award for Best Education and Training Provider 2019. In recent years, JGA has expanded in entrepreneurial fashion and building completely new types of training provision and facing changes which have helped it to adapt its marketing mix to the COVID-19 era. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Robin and Richard, for joining us today. Now, I'm going to run through a few questions with both of you, very much building what Anil and Steve said, just to get the discussion going. And then we've got plenty of time for Q&A from all of our delegates at the end as well. So I just wanted to kick off with a bit of a question, in fact, following on from our discussion last week, just to hear a little bit more about from both of you about how the sectors that both of of you work in, how that has changed over the last few weeks thanks to the pandemic. How do you see the products and services that you're both involved in changing? Robin, should we start with you?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I'm going to start off just with my own experience of something that has changed as a result of COVID-19. For several years, I'm a member of a membership organisation of business consultants, and I chair the London group for that. And one of my tasks in that, which is an event job, is to organise a monthly meeting. And they're always face to face. We generally tend to hold them in central London. Obviously, with lockdown, we had to move to remote session, and it has had a very interesting impact because we used to normally get somewhere between 15 and 25 people at the face-to-face meetings, but it was quite. There were times when it was much lower. One of the things that we found is that the remote sessions have opened up a bigger window for people in the network further afield. So I'm getting members from all over the country joining the meetings. We now have an unofficial meetings of the various chairs of the regions. We're looking at much better ways of collaborating, and at the moment the online meetings are going extraordinarily well, and we're finding we're getting more agile in using the remote versions of the meetings, and we're actually getting quite a lot of work done and collaboration done, which is interesting. And I think that the longer term effect is that we all seem to agree, the members and the chairs, we feel that when lockdown is over, and when thankfully we hope that we're all back to normal, I think there will be a mixture of remote and face-to-face meeting. The face-to-face will probably go down to maybe once a quarter, and the rest of the meetings will be remote. So that's quite an interesting, very specific effect on a project that I've been working on for many years. In terms of the event industry, I mean, the event industry has, the use of remote events has been on the rise for quite some time. But it's quite interesting because I think that the industry itself has been partly reluctant. I mean, there are some fundamental issues about events, and that is, and I'm a firm believer in it, I've been in it for a long time, and I think that one of the key factors about events is the face-to-face element of it. But I think that one thing that's happened with the current situation is that we're now taking hold of the learning that we've been doing over the past several years about new technologies that are available to us for remote events, and embracing it, and it is starting to have quite an effect. I do firmly hope and believe that there will be still an incredibly important place for face-to-face events. But I think we will see a greater usage, again, more agile, more innovative, more interesting ways of using remote events. The technology has been developing, and I think that what's happened is that there's been a major push, even in the last few weeks, to really kind of take a look at the technology and use it properly.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Robin. So already starting to get a sense of how some of those long-term changes might impact an industry which has notoriously been about face-to-face products. Richard, could I bring you in here? Because that seems like the right moment, talking about face-to-face services and training. We'd love to hear a bit more about some of the trends that you've seen developing in terms of product over the last few weeks.
Absolutely, Zoe. It's very clear that with people not getting together in workplaces, that face-to-face physical togetherness is off the agenda in the training industry and every other industry pretty much. And it was very easy to say, okay, we'll adapt by going digital, and we'll do it all by Zoom and by Microsoft Teams and so forth. But it's more complex than that. It is harder to do 7.5 hours on a video conference than it is to do 7.5 hours in a room, for example, a physical room. So then there are questions about how do you structure the days? Do you do whole days, or do you do an hour a day for each day of the week, for example, or how is it structured? How does it work best? And we found other clients where they may have furloughed apprentices and they've actually asked us to intensify the training. So while people are furloughed, they're getting as much learning in as possible. So when they get back to work, they're ready to go and not losing so much time to learning things. So there's a big impact. And in terms of the tools we use, it's the sales executive apprenticeship has a fairly well-developed virtual learning environment, which I'm sure Neil and other people use. But for many of our other programs, we do it on a much more ad hoc basis. So many of the resources and the tools are online, but they're not together in one place, looking smart and structured in quite the same way. So it's has pushed us to get more organized about getting that together and to invest heavily. And that, of course, then can only be done if the organization is in a position to invest heavily. So in the training industry, lots of organizations have asked for government help, for example, particularly the colleges. And that then slows down the opportunity to make these changes and to keep up to speed. Because by the time the government's released stuff, half the time, of course, COVID is pretty much gone, or at least in part. So there are lots of complexities. It's not just a case of we were face-to-face and we're now online. It's a case of how do you do that for best effect. You can do it to some degree, but then how do you optimize it? How do you make sure the learning experience is as good as possible for everybody?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's such a good point about how this transition to where your product needs to be now to get it to customers is the amount of time and investment that is required in terms of adapting it and transitioning and getting people used to it. I think many organisations have found that in itself a bit of a learning curve. So you spoke there, Richard, about very much adapting to people's growing needs, and I wondered whether you, and of course Robin as well, had any insights on how can you stay really close to your customers and other stakeholders so that you're really making sure that any changes that you have to make to product and service during that time very much meet what they want.
Who are you addressing first, sorry?
Robin, do you want to go first then?
Yeah, no, I'll come in on that. I think it's a really important point, and I mean there's an awful lot of discussions going on. There's lots of research being done and lots of insights being put out there, and I think it's quite important that particularly in the events industry, there are some events that actually do lend themselves to the ability to be able to provide them remotely. I mean, even some of the really big events like live music and live sport can be quite happily streamed live. I mean, they also have their own issues involved in them. But I think that what is happening is that people are taking more care about the needs of the clients, the needs of the attendees, and it's in a way it's kind of making us think more deeply about the way that events can be now and in the future. So I think it's giving us. I'm quite excited by what's been happening, because I think it's opening people's minds up to a lot more opportunities. As I say, there's been talk about using more technology in events for quite a number of years. There's been a lot of reticence because some of the technology has been under development, and it's a crazy world, events. I mean, I've been involved in it for 25 plus years, and I love every minute of it. But it's a challenging kind of environment that you work in, and everything really needs to be absolutely right. And I think the fear of the technology not being absolutely there for you. I mean, Steve made a great point about the training. We're in a situation where we are under the I can't think of the right word, but we are so much influenced by the ability to have good technology available to us. Just simple stuff like Wi-Fi, which we all experience in the event industry all the time. But I just think that organisations will be taking a much broader look at this in terms of how the event industry is going to develop, and there will be some fundamental changes to the way we all work, but also the way that the event industry will work.
Absolutely. Large scale disruption already happening and coming our way even more, as you say. So Richard, do you have any advice for organisations and of course the delegates that we have here today around how they can really keep pace with what their customers want and need and evolve their products accordingly?
Yeah, a lot of the messaging and feedback is very much on a one-to-one basis, and people's availability and inclination to do one-to-one feedback there's been a real dichotomy between, on the one hand, people who frankly are a bit bored because of things have slowed down, or maybe they've been furloughed and they're delighted to speak and chat and feedback, and people who are absolutely frantic because they're trying to cope with immense amounts of change within their organizations, or changing customer demands or whatever it might be, but to cope with the situation and are under pressure. And obviously in a lot of organizations where some people have been furloughed, the numbers furloughing, if it was done early, doesn't necessarily match the division of the workload. So there may be people left who are picking up the workload that may not be something they're familiar with. So it may not just be a case of additional volume, but actually learning new jobs and skills. So there is that need to come back to what Steve said, to be empathetic, to treat people as individuals, not just as numbers on the spreadsheet, and to make sure that you're trying to adapt and being seen to try to adapt the service or the product to the needs of the market. And clearly, in some cases, what clients are saying is very clear. So, for example, if you're in the flour milling business, then there's been a huge change of demand, and the reason that supermarkets have had a shortage of flour has been that most flour is made in huge bags for the catering trade, and of course all of a sudden the catering trade is not taking very much, and the retail trade has picked up a little bit, and therefore a supermarket can't cope with selling a 20-gram bag of flour because no individual can carry it home, quite apart from anything else. So the issue there isn't the amount of flour that's about, it's the availability of packaging capacity at the various different sizes. But that's a very real, very interactive feedback loop with clients, essentially. But it depends. The social media clearly is another way to make contact, but it does mean being social. It's about a discussion. It's not about just broadcasting, and it's making the most of that and targeting people specifically to make sure that they are interacting with you and that they're okay, and that things are not a disaster, and whether there's anything you do to help.
Thank you. That's really interesting, because I think what that really brings home to me is about maximising the value of all those different conversations and interactions that you have with customers, and what those different insights are telling us all. Richard, if we could just stay with you just for a moment, because I had a question about speed, which I think Anil was also referring to as well, about how quickly products and services can be adapted. We're all having to work at tremendous pace at the moment, and you had a great example of how JJ actually had to adapt within about 36 hours, and I just wondered, was an example of how you can move really quickly. You'd be able to share a bit more about some of your learnings from that experience.
Yeah, to some degree we were lucky, because we have spent the last couple of years putting most of our computer systems online, in fact all of our computer systems online, and therefore there wasn't for us an issue, as there would have been less than 2 years ago actually, of things that are stuck on physical machines at work or in server rooms and not having access. We're able simply, in my case, to walk out with a laptop and log on from home. And one or two people moved computers, I believe, but pretty much it was already there. And it very much depends on the nature of your business and your industry. Clearly, if you're in manufacturing, you can't move a piece of plant to your back garden and do it like that, Zoe. But there is a difference, as I said earlier, between what's good enough and what's perfection. And though we never reach perfection, we all struggle for it, of course. That's the challenge. And it was very easy to move online in one respect, but then it is the issues is how long can you keep people's attention for? Is it the same amount of time online as it is in a classroom? How do you break it up? How do you structure things to make sure it's interactive and people are involved and they haven't switched off their camera and gone for a cup of tea and gone for a chat and not come back? Clearly, if they're doing that, they ain't learning, even though technically they may be logged in. So all these sorts of issues that are more than just business continuity, but it's either business improvement or business greatness, I guess, are what we're looking for now.
Thank
Could
you.
I just step
Go
in
on. Yes, of course. Yes, Robin, I was going to bring you. Go for it.
No, I think because Richard made a very good point when in his earlier section, because he talked about how long, you know, the people's attention span online as well, and this is becoming kind of, every industry will have its own issues, but with the event industry, things are being, you know, areas are being discussed about that. I actually do have a client where I organise an annual conference for them every year. It's just a day conference. We have guest speakers, and it's not a big conference. It has about maybe 150 delegates. But there is now talk. In fact, it was supposed to be on April the 27th this year, believe it or not. So we had to stop it, as you can imagine. The board there are now talking about the possibility of having a remote conference later in the year, and there's lots of now kind of narrative and discussion going on about that, because as Richard quite rightly points out, it's very, very difficult to have people on a day's conference online. So we're looking at ways of not fragmenting, but having very specific sessions for the conference, which we've done anyway on the live version. So we've had breakout sessions, but now we're looking at ways of kind of making those breakout sessions very specific. We're having conversations with we use really good quality speakers for many of these sessions, and it's a matter now of discussing with them ways that we can work with them, because we're now talking about them maybe preparing their presentations from home, giving their presentations from home, which again leads to all of the other issues that have already been discussed in the short chance we had this morning. But there's a lot of thought going into it, and I think that we will be geared up much better, even though, as I say, I believe that the event industry will go back to live primarily, partly because of some of the issues that we're talking about. But I think the ability to have that technology available to us is going to be to everyone's advantage as we, you know, go further down the line. So, but it'd be interesting to get that kind of feedback from different industries. I mean, Emil made some really good points in his session there, and I think that every industry has very specific requirements that will need to be met by the current situation.
Thank you, Robin. That's really interesting. So we all need to begin really planning ahead for the future, and I think that's a question which we will explore a bit more as part of the discussion with delegates. So speaking of which, now is the opportunity to ask your questions to Robin and Richard about different aspects of how COVID-19 is going to change product. So who's got a question that they'd like to ask? You can either raise your hand digitally, or you can physically put your hand up, and myself and Jubril will look for you, make sure that you get heard. But who's got a question that they would like to ask our panel today? Steve, go for it. Thank you.
I've got a question for Robin, particularly about technology. Do you think that the COVID-19 situation will just accelerate a change that was in the process of happening anyway? Or do you think that from the events industry specifically, it will move it in a different direction?
Great question, Steve. And from we've been talking about this a lot, and I think it's a combination of both, because I think that there are some great examples of people I've been chatting to in the industry where they've admitted themselves they were kind of toying with various technology opportunities that they can use in events, and what COVID has done is it's actually kind of brought it forward. And so what's happening is they're doing a lot more really critical testing of potential technology they can use that specifically lends itself to that ability to be able to do things remotely. But I think that there will be some kind of almost permanent additions to what the event industry will and can do as we go further down the line, just because because of the experience that we have now. But I think in principle, it's actually taking the kind of the discussions and the work that has been going on in terms of technology further forward and quicker. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thank you. So some real increase of the pace of change there potentially. Thank you, Steve. Great question. Thank you, Robin, for the response. Richard, any thoughts from you on that point?
I think permanence is an interesting issue. So how many of these changes are going to stay? Clearly, take one extreme in the future, if we talk about bags of flour, clearly the catering trade comes back and people are spending less time at home and things presumably go back to normal. But in other ways, so if you look at us with our delivery that's traditionally been predominantly localized and is now wholly remote, will we ever go back, having broken through that psychological barrier of both amongst the clients and the learners and ourselves, I think, to convince ourselves that we can do a good job remotely? I think we're much more likely to go to a digitally led blended learning approach, i.e. the majority remote with some local or physical on site. And there are lots of advantages for that. From a producer point of view, of course, there are cost benefits, people not schlepping all over the country. Being able to put together groups from all over the place to get a more sensibly sized cohort. All this stuff makes a real difference, and in some respects, COVID has been a really timely help in that sense of breaking through one of these barriers that makes a big impact on our cost base. So I think for some things and some industries, the changes put in place for COVID will absolutely have a long-term impact.
Thank you, Richard. It's really interesting as you say what that long-term change looks like. I think is a really great issue for organisations to explore as more of that insight comes through. Who else has got questions? Biddy, you've got an excellent question here. Do you want to read that out, or shall I pose that to the panel?
Yeah, I can read it out. I guess it sort of links in with what Richard's just said. There's a question for Robin, really. From the events industry, the RHS Chelsea Flower Show recently had to change completely the way they approach the show, which attracts thousands and thousands of people every year, including me, buying and booking our tickets a year in advance. And this year they actually opened the competition up to normal viewers, people that would normally not even get shortlisted for an entry. And it was quite revitalizing, actually. Do you think that these changes, and I suppose it links in again with Richard's perseverance and continuation, do you think these changes could be continued when they reopen to the public? Do you think many events might do that?
Yeah, I was actually looking at the question when Zoe raised it, and I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, I've been involved in some events, some larger events, where getting participants from much further afield. I mean, it hasn't been because of anything like a pandemic, but there's been cases where there's been kind of major events in London where there is actually potentially a worldwide audience. And so what the client has done has had the major event as a live event, but has actually featured a lot of live streaming and very similar kinds of opportunities for participation from people around the world. And so it's kind of already been in use, and I think that it feels like, I mean, obviously an event like today's Lunch and Learn kind of puts it into some sort of focus, but it feels like there is an openness and a willingness to look at ways of actually using those kind of facilities further down the line. And I do believe that these kind of things will be run on a much more regular basis. Absolutely.
That's really interesting, Robin. So perhaps there's something there about almost co-creating the product where you can, depending obviously on what it is, with your customers and really getting them involved there.
Well, I think people will be more open to the idea of developing those kind of opportunities within events, because one of the things about events is you always look to make things, you know, innovative and different and open up the opportunities to a broader audience. And so this is an ideal way of doing that kind of thing. I think, you know, my hat's off to the RHS, because I think they did a brilliant job doing that, to be honest.
Thank you, Robin. Richard, any thoughts from you on that question?
Yes, I not the RHS specifically, but I noticed, I think yesterday in the newspapers, a Danish football club is putting in giant screens around the stadium in which they aim to have 10,000 Zoom connections to fans. So the fans will be zooming into the football match. They're not paying, I believe. But the idea is to give some atmosphere and lots of roaring and crowd feeling to help the footballers to play. Which just shows what you can do when you're bringing technology into these kinds of situations, or a very service-based industry. It's quite inspiring, I have to say.
Yeah, brilliant to hear about those examples of innovation, particularly on a big mass event like that, helping people feel together when they're apart. I mean, that's really interesting.
I think maybe the most interesting thing will be how they managed to not break the screens with footballs flying around and going up, but I'm sure they found a way.
Reinforced glass, maybe. Very good. Thank you, Richard. So Biddy's got a question for Anil. Biddy, I'm going to read this out if that's okay with you. So do you think that customer service in light of the changes will give you a more dynamic and competitive advantage? And Biddy, you want to ask Anil that question, is that right? Biddy?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yes. Anil, love to hear your thoughts on this.
So it's actually a very similar question to what I was going to ask myself. So given the current situation, I think businesses have obviously realised that you can still operate by having everyone at home. Advantages such as traffic, you know, people may decide to reduce the size of the offices, etc. But particularly in terms of customer service through sales, which is where I work, I've got a defining two set of customers. I've got a set of customers that will be very open to, you know, WhatsApp video calls, Zoom, Skype, etc., which actually the customer service has been great. You know, they're not having to wait for a face-to-face sort of conversation and interaction to discuss certain points. They can just pick up the phone or video call. But then I've also got a set of customers which aren't so great at using, you know, Zoom, for example, or Skype, etc. Now, one of the points that I was thinking is, how does it actually affect business overall? Customer service, I think we would need to adapt. So the guys who are already on board using social media and, you know, WhatsApp and video calls is great. But those who are not so keen on it, I think they'll be at a disadvantage because there's not really any other way. If during the COVID lockdown sort of time, there's not really, unless they change with the times, they're going to be affected negatively. In terms of us being more dynamic and having a competitive advantage over our competitors, unless our competitors, which in my specific market that I work in, are quite savvy with tech, which I don't think they are, they will be at a massive disadvantage. A lot of our businesses that I work with are now, you know, they inherited from their fathers, grandfathers, running the same sort of retail store, which have expanded to multiple sites. But if our competitors aren't as savvy as us, I see them losing share. I see our customers losing interest, because one of the things I notice is that sending a quick message to someone in the morning saying good morning, just because we're so used to using WhatsApp and video calls, actually makes that customer think of you a lot more, which is what I found. So when they're after a certain product or just knowledge in the market, I've noticed that I've had customers calling me up a lot more, which makes me think, why are you not having these conversations with other competitors, which you would have done beforehand when we were all seeing you on a Monday morning at 11 o'clock, when there's, you know, 6 of us different competitors sitting there. Some of our customers would put us out there like that, like we're bidding for their business. But now it just, either they are doing it with all of them, or they're just spending a lot more time with Westmill, for example, asking us questions, which I think, if I go down into it, I think it actually gives us a competitive advantage, because I don't think everyone's using video calls or interaction as much as they should be during this time.
That's really interesting. So where you can deliver that customer service in a really agile way and be really empathetic and use your digital skills to really give your organisation that competitive advantage. Brilliant. That's a great point. Thank you. Have we got any other questions? We've got a few minutes left for Q&A with our panel. So is there anyone else who'd like to ask Richard and Robin a question?
Actually, can I chime in? I'd just like to say that I agree with Anil, and I think it goes back to what I was saying about horses for courses. And there are people who have less to do because of the current situation, or the channels have changed and therefore the competitive landscape has changed. And I think that's essentially what Anil's finding. Some people are really keen to talk and give you much more personal time than normally, and other people aren't. And how much that is depends on the individual and your relationships, and it depends on the industry, and it depends on their organization, I think. I absolutely think Anil can be using it for a competitive advantage to get a leg up for the future.
Fantastic, thank you, and really brilliant that you're already thinking about taking that opportunity. And Anil, that sounds brilliant. Great. So Steve, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I think rightly we're all trying to focus on the opportunities at the moment, and I was just wondering, again, open question really, not just for Richard and Robin, but anyone else wants to chime in. What are the challenges that this throws up, other than the things that we've kind of talked about? For some industries, they're going to find it much more difficult to adapt, or things will move in a direction they find it really difficult to follow. So I was just really interested to hear from anybody as to whether they've identified any challenges, really.
I'm happy to go first. Can I take that?
Go for it, yeah.
Sorry, right. So I think from JJ's point of view, the major challenge has been that number of people beginning new programs, whether that's apprenticeships or diplomas or shorter programs, has dropped off. We have lost very few people who are on program. We've done remarkably well compared with the stories we hear from elsewhere in our industry, with only a couple of people, maybe 3, taking breaks because they're of furlough and so forth. But in terms of the actual pace of starts, whereas we were had assumed 20 to 30 starts per month, we're working on the basis that there'll be 5 or fewer starts per month over the summer months for the apprenticeships. And for the other things, the uncertainty just makes people a little bit more wary. At the end of the day, JJ is generally operating in a regulated market, so there's a limit to what we can do on pricing and product and process. We can be very flexible, but it's very flexible within a set of rules that all participants have to abide by, that Ofsted set and the funding bodies set and all sorts of people set. So clearly there is a challenge. It's in part economic, that if starts dry up, then eventually your business shrivels. In practice, I think we're already seeing an increase in interest. There's been a trickle of new apprenticeship inquiries in the last 2 or 3 days, and people are looking forward and looking at September or even beforehand. I suspect things might get pulled forward in a lot of sectors, and whereas there'll be some sectors which are truly appallingly badly hit for quite a while, like hospitality, for example, there are plenty of other sectors that may experience a boost in demand when things start to get back to normal, because people's I was going to say their cars wear out, but of course, unless they're going to Durham, they can't drive. But people's clothes wear out, or they're wearing different clothes being at home than they would if they're in an office, and therefore they need to replace their jeans, and therefore jeans retailers will have a short-term boom. So I think that there are absolute challenges, and one of those challenges will be managing supply chains to meet demand going up and down in those sorts of situations, because no one quite knows whether things will just stay quiet for a while or whether there'll be a short-term boom for some products and services. So I think demand management, to actually answer Steve, demand management is very much one of the issues. Trying to make sure there is sufficient demand, but that you're not overwhelmed by it. At the moment, we have in the books loosely 80 starts for September for apprenticeships only, and that would overwhelm us if we got 80 starts in a month. We might, if we got several months to prepare over a quiet summer, we might be able to manage it. But at the moment, I'm assuming in practice some of that will bleed into later months. So the volatility of demand is something we have to cope with. And clearly, if demand doesn't come back, then the absolute levels of demand are something that will challenge the finances of all organizations, or all that are have cyclical product sets.
Thank you, Richard. Very insightful. Robin, do you want to say a bit about challenges as well?
I would actually, and in fact, partly kind of incentivized by some of the things that Richard very wisely was saying there. I think that the event industry is going to have some profound effects. I mean, you already talked about the hospitality industry being one of the biggest sufferers in this, and I think one of the fears here is that the event industry will take some time to kind of reposition itself effectively from a financial point of view, because there's been some quite some really difficult issues for the hospitality industry. I can remember quite vividly the very nasty recession we had in 2008, 2009, which had some really quite long-term effects to the hospitality industry and the event industry in particular, which is my area of it. Some of the venues really suffered badly. So there is going to be, I mean, that phrase that Richard used, the management of the kind of recovery is going to be a really critical factor here. But some organisations will be, even if it's only temporarily, they'll be temporarily put off the thought of actually going back into live events, which are quite costly. Not quite so easy to define the ROI, although it's becoming better with social media, etc., etc. And so that there could be some. I think there could be a very slow kind of rebalance of the industry, and I think there are going to be some people that will suffer as a result of that. There are some really innovative event management agencies. I mean, there's some brilliant agencies around the UK in particular that are doing some fantastic stuff, and I think that their kind of leadership in the industry will help to push things forward. But there is going to be some big management issues about the bringing the event industry back into play in full. Obviously, there are going to be many other industries that will have similar kind of issues, but I'm looking forward to seeing how this all going to play out.
So lots of different factors to consider there. Thank you, Robin. It's very helpful. So just to recap on some of those key points from our panel discussion, we talked a lot there about how technology and the acceleration of it and how that can potentially change lots of products and services for the long term, and to think about what that permanence looks like, how organisations are going to have to adapt and work in a much more agile way when it comes to product development, and also in terms of customer service, to Anil's point, and keeping really close to what your customers want and what they're telling you, and thinking of innovative ways to build relationships with them as well. And of course, we talked about some of the opportunities and challenges as we all look to develop and flex our products and services further as the crisis unfolds. With that in mind, we've got a quick exercise for you all, just to get you thinking based on all the very helpful expertise that we've had from Robin and Richard today. So based on what you've learned, what changes do you think you might make to your products and services? So really interested to hear what you think there. Again, if you want to raise your hand, or whether you just want to put some of your ideas into the chat box, really happy to take contributions either way. But we'd love to hear what changes you might make after today based on what you've learnt. Would anyone like to share a change that they're going to make?
Can I jump in? Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I think one of the things I'd like to do is to start being more proactive. Obviously, we've just had a situation we've had to react to largely. It's really difficult to be proactive because it's nothing anybody saw coming other than immediately prior. And of course, how these things evolved, nobody could really predict that either. But as we're now starting to see things to settle down, I think it would be really nice to be more proactive and look forward and involve customers in that discussion. So not what do you need now, as we're now starting to understand what the future might look like, what are you going to need in 12 months time, and how can we start to do some things now to be ready for that. So I think that's one of the things that I'd like to start looking at very soon. Yeah.
Really interesting. So as your customers start to think more about the long term, how can you work with them to really understand and shape what that future will look like?
Yeah.
Thank you. Really interesting. Biddy, did I see that you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think really for me, what's come out of a lot of the things that we're doing with curriculum design is I've opened up discussions with people that teach and deliver on international courses, because their actually audiences or their participants, delegates, are from lots of different countries who come from different backgrounds, languages, etc. So it's trying to open up that dialogue with those academics and professionals and industry experts to see what changes, or if any changes, are required in the way we've actually structured our curriculum and activities, and trying to make that curriculum even more inclusive than it is at the moment, with all the digital changes that are happening and about to happen.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. So really learning from peers, whether it's in your own industry or even wider, and then thinking again about how the products and services can be as inclusive as possible. I think that's really vital. Fantastic. Right, so very good points there. Thanks, Biddy. And Richard, you've put here in the chat you're going to increase the empathy quotient in social media. I think that's a big issue for so many organisations at the moment. Do you want to say a little bit more about how you plan to do that?
Oh, I haven't got that far. Yes, I'm very task focused, as everybody knows, and not very people focused. And it is a time I think you need to recognise people and maybe broadcast less and discuss more. So that's the path we'll be going down.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's a really good plan, because I've seen so many organisations in all kinds of sectors really thinking about how they can adapt that tone of voice and their messaging along those lines. Fantastic, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We're almost at the end of this webinar today. We've covered a lot of ground, really thinking about all those different aspects of products and services and how they have changed and how they will need to change further. So hopefully our wonderful panel here today have given you some insights into some different factors, different themes which you may need to factor in as you think about where your products and services could be in 12 months time, and where they need to be now as well, and the role of customer insight in all of that, and how to gather that too. I would like to say a huge thank you to our panel, Richard and Robin. Thank you so much for your insights today, and also a very big thank you as well to all of our delegates. We will be running the next webinar, which is on how COVID-19 is changing pricing, and I know that income is obviously top of mind for so many of us at the moment. So that will be on Monday the 1st of June from 12 to 1 p.m. So we very much hope to see you there, and we'll be sending out joining instructions for that, but also the pre-activity as well for that session, which is very similar to today's, really getting everyone just thinking about one way in which the crisis has changed your organisation's pricing. So hopefully we will see you there next time. But before we go, since we've got a few minutes left, interested to hear from the delegates. Has anything that you heard today, has it surprised you, or given you perhaps a bit of a insight into some of the opportunities there may be, even during the midst of the really challenging time we all find ourselves in?
Can I just jump in, Zoe? I've got
Yeah.
one thing that just from Biddy's comment about. I think what we kind of from Biddy was talking about getting people more involved internationally, and I think one of the things that it's shown is that we always kind of perhaps thought that the barrier was geography, and actually it turns out that the barrier was probably never geography; it was more culture. There was always a way of overcoming that geographical barrier, but people just didn't accept the fact that it would need a cultural change into how we work together or how we interact, perhaps through things like events. And I think that that's one of the things that's just got me thinking, is that maybe some of the barriers that we think aren't actually what we perceive them to be. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was talking to someone the other week where they had pitched an idea to someone in their organisation who had said, "But we've never done it that way before." And I was saying, if ever there was a time to think about doing things differently, then surely it is now. Fantastic, thank you. Any other reflections on today? Any opportunities that have come to mind because of the discussion?
Can I just jump in?
Go on, Anil, go for it.
I think one of the things by having this call today is actually it highlights the fact that there's always a need to focus on the positives and any opportunities that may arise by situations like the current one. So, for example, some people in my team, they may be concerned about job opportunities moving forward. You know, we're not going to be able to see customers, interaction levels will drop, and therefore sales will drop, and, you know, the world's coming down. I think one of the things I'm actually going to do, similar to, I think it sort of inspired me from this call, is actually sit down with the guy and say, actually list down all the opportunities that you seek for the business that you can see happening in the next 6 to 12 months. Maybe that competitors haven't done, or just so, to Steve's point, we're proactive rather than reactive. And I think, that will help the whole morale of the team, because having this call has actually given me a lot more confidence that there are opportunities out there as well as just dealing with the factors of COVID, or the negative ones. So I think, doing something like that will definitely help me with my call. And I'll probably try that later on today at 4:30. So positive outcome.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful to hear that, Anil. Thank you. And Robin and Richard, before we close, any final thoughts from you two?
If I may jump in here, actually, I'd like to thank Anil, actually, because I think that one of the things that I will probably be doing more is the customer service side of things. It's actually, we have a little bit more time because I'm much more in my office now than I ever was. And I think the opportunity to just have a FaceTime with an existing client or an old client or a potential client is great. And I think the odd call, I think what you said in that about the fact that you're kind of getting in touch with your customers face to face, and it seems to be kind of getting some traction. I think that's great. That's something I'm going to do. So thank you for that, Anil.
Excellent, thank you. What about you, Richard?
I think that psychologically, whether even if it may go on for a lot longer in terms of people not being in offices and things like that, psychologically, the main jolt from the COVID crisis has happened. Everything after the next couple of weeks will be sort of fallout, for want of a better phrase. And the one advantage of something that has been so all-encompassing has been that if you say you're doing something because of COVID, then generally speaking, no one's going to argue with you. And it is an opportunity to try new things, to change business models, whether that be product pricing, promotion, service, people, and so forth. And you can, in quotes, get away with it. I mean that in the sense of things that people would be reluctant to try, they're more willing to try because it's a different world at the moment. And so I think that's the big advantage to COVID. Obviously, there are downsides that lots of people have essentially been not working, and therefore the economy has slowed down, and in some industries being terribly hit and others less so. But there are plenty of upsides, as Anil says, and being able to accelerate change is probably the biggest one of them. And it doesn't just mean go digital, although that is a big part of it.
Thank you, Richard. That's a really positive note to end on about innovation and how we all need to keep looking for that amidst this really challenging time. So thank you so much to Richard and Robin, our panel. Thank you all to our wonderful delegates who've pitched in and shared so many great contributions. Hopefully today's webinar was useful for you. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and ideas, and thank you for offering us the opportunity to have such a rich discussion. And we look forward to continuing that conversation next Monday at midday, again talking about COVID's impact on pricing. So we very much hope to see you there.
Thank you much, Zoe.
Yeah, thank you for controlling it so well, Zoe.
Thank you, Zoe.
Very welcome. Thank you very much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.